I spent the next several weeks wandering from place to place, trying to make my way towards Newgate City. I managed to make the food that I had been given last about a week and a half, after which I came about the problem of needing to get more food. At that point, I had managed to make my way into a far more populated area. A bit of hitchhiking did the job. People tend to be highly suspicious of those they find wandering on the road. But in this instance, being a kid worked to my advantage. Very few think a small child is going to do them any serious amount of harm. Most people tend to assume that if it came down to it, they could defend themselves against a child if they were, well, nuts. So I was able to get a few rides, and eventually ended up in the east section of the Yellow District, near a somewhat populated area, outside of the old world cities, where people tended not to travel. Having no food, I was left with very little recourse as to what to do. I was fairly hungry on a regular basis. Every once in a while, someone would take pity on me, giving me a small amount of food as they passed on the street. But other than that, I really didn't have anything to live on. No shelter above head other than going back to small hovels that I would find around, abandoned places that I could sleep. And I stayed pretty hungry until something of an idea struck me as I was walking down the street one day, spending yet another day trying to figure out how I was going to make ends meet and work my way towards Newgate City. I happened upon an individual who worked for somewhat of a mechanic shop, fixing small odds and ends devices that went around people's houses. They were in the midst of throwing out what to them amounted to junk. A bunch of spare parts that were burnt out or torn up. Clumps of wire and old batteries and such. I don't know what compelled me, but for some reason I felt like there was value in what they were throwing away. Seeing the clumps of wire and circuit boards with scorch marks on them being thrown into the garbage, for some reason struck me as a waste. So, after they finished, I rushed to collect them myself. There was an entire box of them, and I gathered them all, taking them back to the small abandoned property that I was staying at the time. For whatever reason, I seemed to have an understanding of what these different objects did. Circuit boards and chips, and how much power each individual wire could handle. I didn't have any real tools other than a knife, but I did what I could, and from what I salvaged, I felt fairly confident that I could create something of use. The only question being what to make. It needed to be something that I could barter, or perhaps something that was more use to me individually. And that's when it hit me. Well, if I don't have tools, perhaps I should make some. So I did. After a fair amount of work, I managed to create my first piece, which was a basic soldering iron. It was ramshackle at best, and with no access to power, I had to rig the device to generate a slow amount of power on its own and store it away. It wasn't very much, but it was enough to get some soldering done for creating more effective devices. After which, I started to scavenge far more often, especially at places that worked for technological purposes, fixing devices, selling ones, buying ones. Places that things were more likely to be thrown away. Some of the local businesses even began to recognize me, scavenging through throwaway electronics. And some began to simply just hand them directly to me, rather than throwing them out and making me dig for them. This began to occupy a large portion of my time, but soon enough, I had built up a respectable collection of makeshift tools that I had made from all of these throwaway electronics. I had even managed to create my own small generator. It was too delicate to be portable, so I had to find somewhere to lay down sort of roots. Somewhere that no one would complain that I took ownership of, which wasn't a problem. This segment of the city had plenty of abandoned places, and whenever someone found one and took up residence there, no one really had a problem with it. So, when it came to putting the last touches on the generator, I waited till I moved everything there before getting it up and running. After which, I was able to have light and power functioning throughout the day and the night, however I wished. I started to make my life a bit more comfortable. Before I knew it, I was bartering away small gadgets that I had made, toys, repaired AC units for environmental suits, replacement chips for devices that people often used, even ones that could go into weaponry. After seeing the originals, making duplicates wasn't a difficult task, so long as I had the parts for it. And I began to make enough money that I no longer was starving on a regular basis. I had even created a small refrigeration unit, of course built from throwaway parts, but that didn't stop it from working just fine. So I had no problem storing away even fresh foods. One day, probably about a month or two after I had started my scavenging, I was out going towards the market when I began to hear a very loud commotion. Someone yelling and shouting. It sounded like a man. Someone who was upset about something. As I approached, I saw that he was yelling at a girl about my age with red hair. "You little brat! I finally got you this time. You've been stealing my food for far too long, twerp. Do you think the food I sell is free? Think you can just eat all you want? As long as I don't catch you? I work hard for the food I sell. It costs hard-earned money to gather. The farmers don't sell it for free. So here's the deal. Either you fork over all of the money for the food you've been stealing, or you can work for me until you've paid it off. There will, of course, be some surcharges on it. You'll have to pay for your housing, your rent, the utilities you use, fresh clothes, and the food that you eat while you're there. It'll be a fair enough arrangement. I'm sure you'll be able to pay me back, eventually," the man said, clasping onto the girl's wrist. "I didn't steal any of your stupid food. Let me go," the girl replied, still trying to pull away from him. "Don't lie to me. I caught you red-handed. I was just looking at it. I wanted to see if it was good or not. Lots of people try to sell food that's no longer good. You have to check it," the girl shouted. "Yeah, sure. Well, how about we lock you up for a few days and see if my food still keeps coming up missing? I bet that'd answer the question, wouldn't it, brat?" "What? You can't do that," the girl shouted in return. All said, it didn't sound like this guy felt like being reasonable, regardless of whether she stole it or not. He sounded as if he had already made up his mind, and based on the supposed deal he offered, more or less he'd keep her as, well, a slave. A financial one. prisoner by lack of currency. Sure, he'd take money off of her debt based on the work she did, but it would never surmount the amount that he charged her for a place to stay and food to eat. I had heard deals like that before. They were exceptionally distasteful. It was just another word for indentured servitude. I don't really know what compelled me, but in the moment, I really couldn't help myself. I pulled the tattered hood over my head, putting on some goggles and a rag around my face so no one would recognize me, hopefully. I had built a few gadgets for self-defense in case I needed them. So, without any warning, I ran up right next to the girl, holding a small device up to the man with both hands open, as if I was giving him a gift. Wordless, of course. Who the hell are... What do you want? He said, beginning to peer at the object in my hands. What, you're giving me this? I'm busy right now, kid. As he said it, I simply pressed the object even more, not wanting to actually speak. The girl with red hair seemed to look at me curiously. What, is this some sort of payment? So I let your little friend go? I shook my head in confirmation. Like this little thing's gonna pay off her debt, he said, taking the object from my hands. What the hell even is this? After he took the object from my hands, I made a gesture of pushing a button. As he began to look over it, he saw the small red button on the device. What, you want me to push the button? He said, one hand still firmly clasped around the girl's wrist. Holding the device in his other hand, he extended his thumb and pressed the red button affixed to it. As soon as he did, a bright flash of light struck out from the device, and an ear-shattering ringing, which completely blurred his and basically everyone else's in the area's senses. In shock, he let go of the girl's wrist. I was wearing goggles at the time, and already knew what was coming, so I was a bit more braced for it. In the moment, I took the opportunity to grab the girl and, well, run for it, making our way out of the market center, running off into the alleyways that lead away from the market, as everyone where we just left seemed to be in a frantic panic. It didn't take long for them to decide to smash the device, and for the ringing and bright light to stop. But by the time they did, me and the girl had already made our exit. We kept running for some time through back alley streets before we decided we were far enough away and it looked like no one was giving chase. So I finally stopped, beginning to catch my breath for the moment, when suddenly I felt a hard shove. "You idiot!" she shouted, as the girl was the one who pushed me. Which did make sense. She was the only one in the alley with me. "What?" I replied, completely shocked. "What if you ruined everything? I was supposed to be buying time." What are you talking about?" I replied, stunned that she wasn't thankful. After all, I saved her from indentured servitude. At which point, I heard another voice. "Hey, there you guys are!" As I looked down towards the other end of the alley, I saw a boy, once again about our age, running through the alley, heading in our direction, waving at the girl with the red hair. "I made a killing," he said as he approached, a satchel over his right shoulder, seeming to be stuffed with something, putting it on the ground and grabbing out a small bundle of dried foods, tossing it over to the girl with red hair. "We got grub and plenty of it." "Ugh," the girl with the red hair sighed. I almost thought that this kid ruined it all, she replied. So you still managed to get a good amount? Yeah, in between you and that whole thing put up by the flashing light and the sound. Well, that was more than enough distraction. I managed to get weeks worth of supplies. Everyone was so tripped out by that little gadget that it was basically easy. They were so busy looking for the two brats who caused that it was basically free pickings for me. So you were stealing food, I said, looking over to the girl with red hair, feeling very gypped. I can't believe I went through the effort of helping a thief. Now I feel like a moron. Well, you can have some food if you like, the girl replied with a smile, pressing the bundle of dried food into my hands. Let's call it your cut. You're not making me feel better about this. Well, my name is Emily. This is my friend Barry. So, what's your name? The red-haired girl said, now knowing she was named Emily. My name's Jax, I replied, feeling as if, since what was done, and I couldn't change it, I might as well make a friend. Thieves or not, I hadn't spent a great deal of time getting to know kids my own age. It was nice to see some who didn't look at me like I was, well, garbage. But these two seemed to have a friendly smile. Emily and Barry. In the moment, as they both smiled at me, offering their names, I wondered if I'd ever really get a chance to really know them, or if this was gonna be basically it.